Leadership Lyceum, a CEO's virtual mentor. Now, here's your host, Tom Lindquist.
Glad to have you back in the Leadership Lyceum, where we bring you direct access to top CEOs and directors of boards in an interview format that provides insight on situational issues that confront CEOs every day. It is a CEO's virtual mentor. Welcome to episode 7 of the Leadership Lyceum, a CEO's virtual mentor. Happy New Year and welcome back. This is part 2 of our novel episode with not one, but 3 guests. I'm joined by 2 recently retired utility CEOs and a highly regarded member of both of their boards. These are McKinsey & Company Emeritus Dr. Les Silverman, former lead independent director of Pepco and independent director of Columbia Pipeline Group. Mr. Robert Bob Skaggs, former CEO of NiSource and then CEO of CPG, and Mr. Joseph Joe Rigby, former Chief Executive Officer of Pepco. As a board member for both companies, Les Silverman was at the vertex of notable M&A transactions that took place under the leadership of each of these CEOs over the last 2 years. At NiSource, Bob Skaggs presided over the separation of the gas storage and transmission assets from the regulated utility. Bob led CPG's spinoff from NiSource into a standalone publicly traded company in July 2015, and the subsequent sale of CPG to TransCanada 1 year later. At Pepco, Joe Rigby led the sale of Pepco to Exelon. The NiSource CPG transaction unfolded in a relatively smooth and speedy manner, while the Pepco acquisition could only be described as epic and protracted. My fabulous foursome gathered in early autumn in 2016 in the Pepco offices in Washington, D.C., in one of the rooms where it happened, several months after the completion of their transactions, to reflect on the deliberations and perspectives of these executives and one of the non-executive directors who made it all happen. While much has been written about the legal, financial, strategic, and operational details of these transactions, the complex human and social interactions that lead to these monumental decisions usually go unexamined. We'll be right back to join part 2 of the interview.
No one else was in the room where it happened, the room where it happened, the room where it happened. No one else was in the room where it happened, the room where it happened, the room where it happened. No one really knows how the game is played, the art of the trade, how the sausage gets made. We just assume that it happens, but no one else is in the room where it happens.
That's Lin-Manuel Miranda's The Room Where It Happens from the hit Broadway musical Hamilton. Let's return to our discussion with Bob, Joe, and Les in part 2. You'll recall from part 1 that the Pepco merger was complicated by the multi-jurisdictional approval process. We join Les Silverman, former Pepco lead independent director, recounting the August 2015 denial of the merger in D.C.
I want to go back to the August event.
August
2015, when after getting approvals from New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland. Maryland was no slam dunk.
That was right.
I mean, that was the first time it looked like the merger was not going to happen. But we got a 3-2 vote in Maryland. And then in D.C., which some had assumed would be easier than Maryland, turned out in August, much to everyone's surprise. The champagne corks were ready to pop, and it came down as a no, Animus Denial. And I remember Joe calling me. I was on the beach somewhere. It was August, and we had to help the board through all 5 stages of grief in about a day and a half, because there was a lot of anger. There was a fair amount of depression. When acceptance came, it was because we knew that Joe and his team, even if they didn't have a plan right then, that they were going to have it. So there was a lot of confidence that we're going to come through this okay. If it ends up being we're on our own, that's okay. We're ready for it. Joe and obviously the colleagues at Exelon came up with another Hail Mary pass to throw, which turned out to be successful. But the board had its own adjustment to that denial to get through, and it was the confidence we had in Joe and his team and the relationship that Joe had formed with Chris Crane and the team at Exelon that gave us confidence that this was worth another try, even though there was certainly some risk to our go-it-alone plan by hanging in there for another 8-9 months.
Yeah.
If it didn't happen, we were going to be that much further behind. But again, we brought out the numbers, did a careful analysis, and thought that it was worth the shot, and it turned out to be.
When you talk about the 5 stages of grief, the board is a social organism. What did you do from the human side with the board to sort of get them through?
It starts with the word Bob used of transparency. Between Joe and me, we spoke to every board member, if not that day, but the next day. Kept everybody informed of where we were, got their reactions and expressions of concern or disappointment or hope or whatever it might be. We were in constant touch, factored that all in, and it became part of the mix. I don't remember exactly when we scheduled the board call, but it was certainly within 48 hours.
Oh, I remember we actually convened the board that afternoon when we got the
Okay.
yeah.
And then we had a meeting the following week.
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, you're dealing with people.
Yeah.
And I think there's a fine line. I think we did a decent job of treading it, that you have to allow people to emote.
Yeah.
But almost simultaneously, the board is going to be part of the healing and is an energy to go forward, even if it's a tough road ahead, to try to get people focused on the doing of running the company, of creating value, but stopping long enough that people felt like their emotions were being not totally resolved, but certainly being expressed and heard. And I think Les did a great job of kind of holding the space for that dialogue to happen.
Yeah, although not involved in something like this, I guess my board experience is this, that to a person, our board members, they care about the business and the people and the customers. They want to be engaged. They want to be part of the process. And to Joe's point, if you allow that to happen, allow people to emote, allow people to weigh in, allow people to listen, then that will usually get you to the right place.
Yeah.
It really will. But that's an important part of the process.
Unless when you were speaking to these individually, I bet the range of reactions was fairly wide.
Yeah, it wasn't. Sure, people are different, and people had voiced some of the emotions I talked about before in slightly different ways. But what was rock solid was the confidence we had in Joe and the management team. Some of the judgments about what might be easy or not so easy were maybe questioned a bit. And some of the strategy was questioned a bit. But the more we talked about it, if not in those first conversations, then when we got everybody together, I think there was very quickly coalescence around the plan going forward.
And that's what you want a board to do. You want them to their points of view, to do the questioning, and then you usually get to the right answer, the right direction.
Maybe if I can kind of take a step back and made some comments about both boards. I just had a terrific experience with both boards. I was on the Pepco board for 9, almost 10 years, only on the Columbia board for a year. But in both cases, the boards were made up of very talented people with different skills, attitudes, areas of expertise, but everyone had the ability to express their points of view, be heard, listen to others, and come together. And there were issues, certainly during some of the reliability problems that we had within Pepco, where some of our board members got quite vocal about, and appropriately so, about areas of the company they felt needed to be addressed. But there was never any fundamental disagreement about that. It might have been a somewhat different points of view about tactics to get there. But because everyone on the board both boards treat each other with a mutual respect, coupled with respect for management team, I think we were able to weather all these difficulties. And I have to say, I really feel bad for a board that didn't have that.
Right.
Mutual respect.
It brings that to mind.
And you don't just build that in the cauldron of a deal. It comes from having worked together over years before that.
You're blessed with that situation to have a board of that nature.
I can give you a little bit of a different perspective. I was in my position for a decade. The board turned over completely during that decade. So we went through a very deliberate, thoughtful process of bringing in with the right talent, people we thought that could express themselves, people we thought that could be collaborative, that sort of thing. But it was a process. And so we paid a lot of attention to selection, fit, and then making sure that we brought folks up to speed properly so that they could contribute very, very quickly as soon as they joined the board. So it was a very intentional sort of effort to do that.
Delivery process, and then...
Yeah, and one thing that I can see different points of view. We provided the board with a lot of information, and I know sometimes board members will say, oh my gosh, here comes a tsunami of data and information. But it was really all geared again to make sure that they were up to speed, fully engaged, an opportunity to see how the team thinks and works, and who our key leaders are. So I think you have to work at it. The board members are face-to-face maybe, half a dozen, 9 times a year. It's not that frequently. So you do have to work between meetings to ensure that they're fully engaged and have an opportunity to work.
I think both boards, again, had some processes that really helped achieve what Bob's just mentioned in terms of ability to work together collaboratively. Annual retreats in both cases, executive sessions.
Yes.
Very effective lead directors, certainly Sid Cornelius in the Columbia case, Larry Nussdorf, Frank Heinz, and before me as independent directors at Pepco. And I think all of that helps build, that good process builds a collegiality that really, when you need it, really is important.
Yeah.
We had, I wouldn't use the word fun, but, because I wouldn't want it to be seen as being not serious, but I think there was we tried to make things enjoyable. It was enjoyable that we didn't have enormous egos, or that people were unwilling to kind of even laugh at themselves, or to kind of enjoy a level of give and take that creates, this esprit de corps that you want, that to the point Les made, that when the stuff is hitting the fan, you're not trying to find those relationships. They've already been cemented. The one thing I've always appreciated about this board was they were genuinely interested in the leadership as people. They were interested in getting to know people a couple levels down.
Absolutely.
Managing all the information, there were no surprises, but also when the challenges came along, the relationships were in place.
They knew it was on point.
Yeah.
My board split itself. So when we did the spinoff of the pipeline from NiSource, board members, self-selection may be too strong of a word, but they deliberated on where members should serve. And so that was an interesting process.
That is very interesting.
But again, to Les's point, to Joe's point, collaborative, thoughtful, largely they took the lead on that separation. But I think it's healthy.
Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back with Les Silverman, Bob Skaggs, and Joe Rigby. Stay tuned. Welcome back to this discussion with Bob Skaggs, Joe Rigby, and Les Silverman. We join back in here as Joe describes some of the lessons learned in the Pepco sale.
Well, I'll maybe make 2-3 quick comments. In some ways, for us, having been acquired, the decisions that were made, we were not the driving force of the decision, because it was not, it wasn't our money,
right,
in that regard.
I
so
see.
So as this played out, we had a strong voice and a direct channel to influence things, but they weren't really our decisions. So I think in hindsight, if we had it to do all over again, we would have taken more time to try to get a settlement in D.C. We were able to get settlements in advance of the commission actions in Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland. And even though Maryland was a close vote, we had a very good settlement in place that provided the commission a basis to then make a decision. In the case of DC, there was a new administration in place. To be candid, I think some of the positions of the other parties in DC were just kind of beyond the reality of what this transaction could have delivered. When I believe this is the case, I think when the transaction failed, there were people high up in the DC government who were also surprised, who there was a level of reality set in, like this thing could fail, and not only will it fail here, it will fail across the entirety of our footprint. This ripple will go out to New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland. So I think there was an understanding that this was a much bigger issue than just here in the District of Columbia. So when the parties came back together, it took us about 6 weeks, but we were able to hammer out a settlement. If we had a do-over, it would have been where we could have made a decision, it would have been to take a longer period of time to get a settlement in DC. I think the point Les made earlier that we had assumed that if we got a good outcome in Maryland, that the district would have built upon that settlement and would have come up with something. But obviously that's not what played out.
Tom, I wasn't in the room where it happened, but one of my observations is there's no one room because there were a lot of parties involved here, and that's what made this so complicated. The whole transaction, but even the negotiation in the district. You had even the DC government isn't one entity. You had the mayors, you had the
Attorney General.
The Attorney General, you had the
People's Council. You had the strong
Department of Public Works.
Right. Yeah.
So there you have four parties right there, and that's not even bringing in the council and all of those individuals, and that's just one party or one set of parties. Then you have the interveners and the other interested parties. So it was a very complicated discussion.
Very complicated. It would be very difficult to execute a hostile takeover in this sort of environment, I guess, right? You need the cooperation of both sides.
I would. Nothing's impossible, but if it was hostile, I'd have a hard time seeing that ever getting done.
The NiSource transaction with Columbia years ago, 2000, started out as a hostile.
Is that right?
Yeah. Ultimately, it became a friendly deal. And I'm like you, I think it's really, really challenging to see a hostile situation get across the finish line. At some point, the hostilities have to end, and you have to go to your regulators collaboratively.
Yes, right. Just hearing the complexities.
Exactly.
And just hearing about your relationship with Chris and how that all started, where if it was an adversarial type relationship,
hard to see it happen.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He could not have. He is a wonderful person. He's a very strong individual, and in our situation, he was the one who enabled this to get done because it was his company that was going to have to put the value on the table. And as time went on, and it's all public, you can look at commentary that was coming from the analysts that some thought it would be better to just pull up stakes, but he took a longer view and understood that if he didn't get this done over time, that would not accrue to the benefit of Exelon. But in the moment, he showed enormous courage and hung in there.
Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back with Les Silverman, Bob Skaggs, and Joe Rigby. Stay tuned. In the context of this, what goes on in the room, there's the formal elements in the boardroom, there's the informal elements, and we were alluding a bit to the informal elements of the esprit de corps that's built, the engagement of others, the general integrity of the board and the individuals comprising it. When we talk about executive leadership, we talk about the shadow of the CEO and the shadow that the leader casts and the importance of that shadow. Is there a shadow that's cast by the chairman or the lead director in the boardroom that creates this esprit de corps or creates the chemistry in the boardroom?
To me, it's a little bit more nuanced than that because all the board members are accomplished. They have incredible track records. They're all leaders in their own right. And yes, I do think the chairman or chairperson plays a key role in setting the tone and the process and that sort of thing, but it's not the only person that does that. Les brings so much to the table. So he has a leadership that's intellectually based, and so you're aware of that, you understand that, his colleagues understand that. So I think it's a lot more nuanced than just a single person setting the tone, at least in the boardrooms I've been in. And again, you have to be respectful, aware, sensitive, and understand how that can work together. And sometimes when it doesn't work together, you have to be aware of that too. So I tried to be active with the board. I wouldn't say manage the board, but active, engaged in understanding the dynamics of that room, because there are dynamics. In certain issues, one board member might be very, very vocal, might have a lot of influence. On other issues, not quite the same. And again, you have to be aware of that, and I think the board members typically are aware of that. My experience with lead directors and board chairs, to a person, they've been very respectful of the other board members and have asked for their input and participation and have encouraged it, both formally and informally.
The importance of the mentorship between the board and, or one person on the board and the CEO. Does the mentorship relationship come together naturally, or is there a chemistry that's implicit there?
You know, it's kind of strange when I think back to it that, you know, one day you're an officer in the company and then you go through a process where these 10 or 12 people elect you to a new job that's titled CEO, and then later in that meeting they elect you to be their chairman. So they've in some ways they've employed you, and now almost simultaneously you're working for them, but they expect you and you need to lead them. For me, that was a growth process to kind of feel in the beginning feeling very uncomfortable of even calling the meeting to order when, you know, a month before I was just attending the meeting. It's not like you wake up one day and you're, I'm the chairman, and it's almost like a little bit, I felt very self-conscious about not acting like I'm your leader, but over time I came to understand that they expected me to lead aspects of things. I was lucky that I had first Larry Nussdorf, then Frank Heinz, and then Les, that the relationship I had with my LID was, this person was my partner, they were my mentor, they were my truth teller. They needed to tell me the truth, to guide me and to support me, but hold me accountable. And in the case of, you know, Les being the last LID, he was the bridge. He's the bridge from that other group to the CEO.
That's right.
And
That's right.
you know, it's a big job. It's because you're managing all these pieces of information and distill it down to be able to give a message to the CEO that they need to hear. Met Les when I was the CFO, so he was the chair of my finance committee. So he's always been my best friend on the board.
I also chaired the search committee.
That's your mistake. I'm glad you could admit that publicly. But in fact, I'll tell you a funny story. Just totally off script. I remember the meeting that I got elected to be CEO. We all have probably the same way that you have like assigned seats in the boardroom. So I came in and I sat in my chair. And they're all looking at me, and they said, "No, you sit over there." So I had to go up there, and someone said, "Well, how do you feel?" And I said, "Well, I got to tell you, you all look a lot better from this angle." but it's it's a relationship that you forge over time.
It evolves.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But it's critical, it sounds like.
Oh.
Without it.
Incredibly critical. That person, you have to have a really strong, very honest relationship. Because that person can buffer at times. They can sometimes carry messages to certain board members that you may not want to, you don't need to, you shouldn't. So it's an incredibly important relationship. And I've been very lucky like you. I've had just incredible people that could be mentor, counselor, listener, but could also could provide some help.
I would imagine without it, it's destabilizing, debilitating in a way, without that relationship. That is the main tether.
In fact, I mentioned that our board evolved over a decade.
Mm-hmm.
We had some situations where we had to have a discussion with a board member that was time for separation. We're going to transition. And again, we had a very thoughtful, well-respected chair that worked with me, and we were able to do it in, I think, a very respectful, thoughtful way.
Is there a typical thing that kind of reveals itself, or
Not. I wouldn't say typical. We had different circumstances, very, very different circumstances. And we're a board that did not have, till recently, we did not have a term or age limitation for service. So that was one element. It was just time.
Mm-hmm.
Others, there were issues or situations that we just had to deal with.
I see.
Nothing improper, but things that just we had to deal with.
Yeah.
Tom, from my perspective, this lead independent director concept is really important. It becomes a mechanism by which I think all board members can know that what they have to say will be appropriately channeled in the right way to the CEO or whoever else needs to hear it. And I think it helps calm people from feeling like they've got to be the loudest or most frequent voice in the room. Because it becomes a disciplining process because you as a board member understand the route through which communication will take place. So I think it's terrific that it's required for all public companies, and I have to think it's going to help with corporate governance.
That's very, very interesting. So they know they have a channel, and this is the proper channel so they don't need to continue to be the loudest voice in the room.
Or seek back channels that can cause problems.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Very interesting. Generally, I guess as we wrap up here, advice to the CEO, the board, listeners. Jill, I'll start with you. Just general advice from your experience, and it's asking a lot. It's decades of experience wrapped up into a few.
My mind becoming the CEO, I always felt that I'm only temporarily sitting in that chair. So it's not about me. I may be the current occupant, but the objective is to make things a little better than you got it. And when I think back on my tenure, the most important thing to do is to provide the truth to all your constituents. And if you can provide the truth, then you can preserve the integrity of the company. And the other problems will solve themselves, but at the core is a belief system to remain true to your values. I think that's the most important thing. Obviously creating shareholder value, but what really binds the organization together is its adherence to its values. And at the core of that is just giving the truth to the board. I tell my kids the truth will set you free.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And it's a simple thing, but when I think back to the challenges, no challenge was ever as bad as I anticipated it to be. And when the truth came out, I found a lot of support flooding in to help us deal with whatever that particular issue was.
Mm-hmm. When you described the experience of getting appointed and you looked around and things had changed, I'm sure your values were in place, but they may have solidified when you suddenly had that position of responsibility.
When I interviewed for the job, I remember talking about the strategy and the piece parts of the company, but I felt more of what the board was seeking was to understand who I was and how I thought, and how I processed, to the greatest extent that they could anticipate how things would play out. Mm-hmm. I remember, Tom, the week that I became the CEO, I came into a new office on Sunday. I came in with my wife, and I remember sitting in that chair in the corner, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this has actually happened. And realizing that, okay, now you're going to have to be much more reliant on not your accounting or financial acumen. This is going to be much more about how you shape decisions around integrity. And if you can do that, not everything may play out, but you'll probably get to the right answer.
We think in terms of credibility. You always have to have your credibility. And the thing I would add to it, and you've heard me mention it before, is process and discipline around process. Building relationships is a process. Thinking through transactions is a process. communicating internally and externally is a process. And what my experience has been when I've gotten in trouble or our team has gotten off track, we usually strayed from the process. We weren't true to the process. We were inconsistent. We weren't as disciplined as we needed to be. And that would go, examples would be investments, dealing with people. You can go on and on and on and on. But it's something you just have to always keep front and center for yourself and your team. Is you've got to do it the correct way. And again, it goes from communication to the board, building a relationship with the board or a regulator or whoever.
But there's something about the way you do that, Bob, the focus on the process that even and I'm saying this from experience with you and helping on building the board, you have a way of focusing on the process and having these very short, compact conversations, but at the same time, kind of giving the spirit of yourself and kind of encouragement through that too. And so there's a discipline there, but there's a style that you do.
Well, hopefully it's not lifeless, right?
It isn't. It isn't. It's absolutely not. You have this chemistry that you've built about being able to deliver it in a way that's inspiring and motivating, but it is focused and very clear at the same time. Any general advice around maybe all that we've talked about in terms of boards or...
one thing I was going to go back to, because we mentioned the name Joe Frumpkin, who's a Sullivan Cromwell deal attorney and really well-respected, very experienced. I'm a believer in using advisors. I really am. Now, some people don't believe in that. I believe that if you have a good, strong cadre of advisors and you work with them in the correct way with discipline and a process, they can be invaluable. And I wouldn't promote one advisor over another, legal over management consulting or other. But I think if you make judicious use in this day and age of a good, strong suite of advisors, it's just going to help you. You have to be thoughtful in the way that you work with them.
And that's, I wanted to ask you more on that because, we are in the business of giving advice too. There's certain situations where it feels very transactional and there's no room for advice that our client may be receptive to. We're thrilled, and the best clients are those that actually open the door and create the window for the advice, and there's an interaction that takes place there.
We hope we have that same belief that you're talented, we pay you a lot, we want to hear what you've got to say. Now, it's up to us to digest it, accept it, reject it, modify it, but it's up to us to deal with that information. But we want the information. And we had a policy, we because we were relatively small early on, bankers didn't call us a lot, or management consultants wouldn't call us a lot. But we encouraged people to come in and visit because we wanted to hear what they said, what their perspectives were. We were just after good, solid information. And we also understood, I think we did, that when a task like a separation of a company was way out of our sweet spot, we needed good, strong help on that. And we thought, we're going to pay the money, we're going to use them, and we're going to use their ideas and their talent.
That's music to my ears.
Didn't mean to give you a paid or an unpaid advertisement, but I've got to say, those folks have really served us well. And our teams learn so much from working side by side with really smart people from the outside. Incredible. Well, I'd say that about McKinsey. We use Lazard, Goldman, a host of other banks and legal advisors, and we tried to get as much out of the experience as we could.
Well, and it makes everybody better because it just creates a virtuous cycle of better advice all the way around.
And I haven't seen, at least in our board situation, I haven't seen an advisor stampede a board yet. And again, really experienced, thoughtful people that understand how to use advice or how to reject advice.
Les, you're in the anchor spot here as the...
Well, I'll just make this quick. I think the most important advice I can give to a potential board member is make sure you have CEOs who have the integrity, the intelligence, and are as much fun to be with as these two guys.
Oh, boy.
When you have that, it's easy to be a board member.
That's nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's nice. Thank you.
And I'll just, I should leave it there, but I for those that are considering joining a board, it might be their first board, there's a pressure to do that, to be on their first board. What do you look for in that regard? What are the things that you'd advise a first-time board member to
Well, I think you
consider?
need to spend the time and have the conversations to be able to understand the strategy, what it's based on. Is it based on hopes and prayers, or the kind of analysis that these two companies were excellent at? And then the kinds of conversations to where you can look someone in the eye and know that when the times get tough, there'll be people that you can trust, that you can work with, and that will be leaders that you'll want them to be of their organizations. As a board member, there's only so much you can do. You're dependent on, and you've got to be able to trust in the management led by the CEO. And if you don't have that trust, it's going to be a very lonely place to be on a board, because you're responsible without much ability to really make things different. But conversely, when you have that level of trust and confidence, even the most difficult situations can be dealt with.
Thank you all for doing this. It's been an honor being with all three of you, and it's been novel just doing all this at once, having a foursome around the table.
That was fun for us too.
Yeah, thanks for the
Yeah, it
invite.
was very nice.
Thanks for hosting us, Joe.
Sure thing.
That ends episode 7 of our discussion with Les Silverman, Bob Skaggs, and Joe Rigby from one of the rooms where it happened. We'll release our next episode on the weekend of February 4th, coincident with the release of our next feature article in the February issue of Public Utilities Fortnightly. I'm pleased to announce that it's an interview with Susan Story, CEO of American Water. American Water is the largest publicly traded water utility in the country, serving one of the basic human needs of about 15 million customers across 47 states and in Ontario, Canada. The company serves and Susan leads in a mission-critical infrastructure sector. I've had the pleasure of hearing Susan speak to industry groups on numerous occasions over the last several years. Her speeches are engaging and carry a power that moves an audience to action. On deeper reflection after our interview, I realized that the persuasive power in her public speaking and her approach to leadership revealed in our interview demonstrates the quintessential leadership qualities for effective leadership beyond the boundaries of a corporation that she leads and into the realm of public policy, an area in which she is highly effective. Join me for the next episode in which we'll explore Susan's ability to lead, I call it, beyond authority. The Leadership Lyceum, a CEO's virtual mentor, has been a production of the Leadership Lyceum, LLC, copyright 2016, all rights reserved. Come back and listen. It's lonely at the top.